In the quiet coastal town of Lewes, Delaware, a 68-year-old retired nurse was about to teach her daughter-in-law a lesson she would never forget. What began as a family dinner celebrating Evelyn Peterson's recovery from a stroke took a devastating turn when she overheard her daughter-in-law Melissa whispering that she was just faking it for attention. The words cut deep, but they also awakened something in Evelyn that would change the course of her family's future forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Evelyn wasn't your typical stroke survivor, silently enduring the painful road to recovery. For 35 years, she had built a respected career saving lives in the emergency room at Beebe Healthcare, known for her quick thinking and unshakable composure under pressure. The same resilience and quiet dignity that her daughter-in-law, Melissa, had dangerously underestimated. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something special just for you. The January morning carried that particular Delaware chill that Evelyn Peterson had always found invigorating. Frost painted delicate patterns across her kitchen window, transforming the view of the bay into a glistening wonderland. She stood at the counter, her left hand moving with deliberate slowness as she prepared her morning tea, each movement a small victory in her ongoing recovery. 3 months had passed since the stroke that had nearly taken her life, a terrifying episode that had begun with sudden confusion and ended in the same emergency room where she had spent decades caring for others. The irony wasn't lost on her. After years of explaining to patients that recovery would be a marathon, not a sprint, she was living that reality herself, fighting for every incremental improvement. Evelyn's right side had regained most of its strength, but her left side remained stubbornly weak. The physical therapist who visited 3 times weekly praised her progress, but Evelyn knew better than most how far she still had to go. Each morning ritual, making tea, brushing her teeth, getting dressed, had become a series of small battles, private triumphs that only fellow survivors could truly understand. The sound of car doors slamming disrupted her thoughts. Through the frosted glass, she could make out her son Michael's SUV in the driveway, followed by a sleek silver BMW that she recognized as belonging to his wife, Melissa. Evelyn felt the familiar mixture of joy and apprehension that had come to define her relationship with her daughter-in-law over the 7 years of their marriage. She loved Michael fiercely, her gentle, creative son who had followed his passion for marine biology instead of the medical career she might have expected. At 33, he had built a respectable position at the University of Delaware's Marine Research Center, studying the impact of climate change on coastal ecosystems. But his choice in partners had always puzzled her. Melissa emerged from her BMW like a model from a luxury car advertisement, her designer boots navigating the icy driveway with practiced precision. Even from a distance, Evelyn could see her daughter-in-law surveying the modest 2-story colonial with that familiar expression, part assessment, part disappointment. The home Evelyn had shared with her late husband Thomas for over 4 decades was well maintained but decidedly unfashionable by Melissa's standards. "Mom," Michael called, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness that adult children adopt when visiting aging parents. He jogged toward the side door, arms laden with bags from what appeared to be an upscale grocery store in Rehoboth Beach. Evelyn moved to greet him, consciously focusing on maintaining her balance. The physical therapist had warned her about the dangers of falling, especially during these winter months. "What a wonderful surprise," she said, meaning it despite the flicker of concern about her appearance. She hadn't expected visitors and was still in her comfortable recovery clothes, soft pants and one of Thomas's old University of Pennsylvania sweatshirts that she'd taken to wearing since his passing 3 years ago. Michael enveloped her in a gentle hug, carefully avoiding putting pressure on her left side. "Sorry for dropping by unannounced. Melissa thought it would be nice to cook lunch for you." Evelyn glanced over Michael's shoulder to where Melissa stood in the doorway, her smile perfect but somehow not reaching her eyes. "Evelyn, you look comfortable," she said, the slight pause communicating volumes. "Melissa," Evelyn responded warmly, years of nursing having taught her to maintain a pleasant demeanor regardless of circumstances. "How thoughtful of you both." Melissa stepped inside, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume that momentarily overwhelmed the homey aromas of Evelyn's kitchen. "We brought everything for a proper lunch. I've been reading about post-stroke nutrition, and honestly, I was concerned about what you might be eating on your own." The comment stung, wrapped as it was in the guise of concern. Evelyn had been preparing meals for herself since she was 10 years old, helping her working mother feed their family of 5. Even with her current limitations, she managed simple, nutritious meals that honored the dietary recommendations her doctors had provided. "That's very kind," Evelyn said, choosing to focus on the positive. "I've been following Dr. Wilson's nutrition plan, but it's always nice to have company for lunch. Michael began unpacking the groceries, revealing an assortment of ingredients that seemed better suited to a dinner party than a simple family lunch. Melissa's been taking these amazing cooking classes, he explained, his pride in his wife evident. She's been dying to show off her new skills. I wouldn't call it showing off, Melissa corrected, already moving around Evelyn's kitchen with proprietary confidence. I just think proper nutrition is critical for recovery, and I want to make sure you're getting what you need, Evelyn. As Melissa opened cabinets and drawers with increasing frustration, Evelyn could see her mentally cataloging everything that wasn't up to her standards. The well-loved but mismatched dishes that had served the Peterson family for decades. The practical but uninspiring flatware. The dated appliances that worked perfectly well despite their age. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Where do you keep your food processor? Melissa asked, her tone suggesting that every proper kitchen must have one. I don't have one, dear, Evelyn replied. I've always managed with a good knife and a bit of patience. Melissa exchanged a look with Michael that Evelyn pretended not to notice, a look that clearly communicated what a tragedy it was that poor Evelyn lived in such primitive conditions. Michael, Melissa said with exaggerated patience, why? Don't you run to that kitchenware store in Rehoboth and pick up a food processor? I really can't make this properly without one. Before Evelyn could protest, Michael was already reaching for his keys, ever eager to please his wife. No problem. Mom, do you need anything else while I'm out? I'm fine, sweetheart, Evelyn assured him, though what she really wanted was for him to stay, to buffer the uncomfortable dynamic that always developed when she was alone with Melissa. As the sound of Michael's SUV faded, Melissa turned to Evelyn with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Now we can have a proper chat, just us girls. Evelyn settled carefully at the kitchen table, conserving her energy for what she suspected would be a challenging conversation. That sounds lovely. How are things at the design firm? Melissa worked as an interior designer for a high-end firm in Wilmington, a career she referenced frequently and with considerable emphasis on her important clients. Busy, as always. We just landed the Richardsons, you know, the family that owns those car dealerships? They're completely renovating their beach house in Bethany. That sounds exciting, Evelyn offered, genuinely interested despite her apprehension. It would be if I had more time, Melissa said, her tone shifting. But lately, I've been so concerned about you, Evelyn. Michael worries constantly, you know. He's afraid you're not being honest about how much help you really need. The statement caught Evelyn off guard. I'm making steady progress. My physical therapist is quite pleased. Physical therapists always say that, Melissa interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. They're paid to be encouraging. But Michael and I have been talking, and we think it's time to consider some more appropriate living arrangements for you. Evelyn felt her chest tighten slightly. I'm not sure what you mean. Melissa began chopping vegetables with efficient, aggressive strokes. This house is clearly too much for you to manage now. All these stairs, the maintenance, the yard work. And you're so isolated here. What if something happened? What if you had another stroke when no one was around? I have my medical alert pendant, Evelyn said, touching the device she wore around her neck. And Diane from next door checks on me daily. The visiting nurse comes twice a week, and I have physical therapy 3 times a week. That's all very piecemeal, Melissa said with a sigh that suggested Evelyn was being difficult. We've been looking into some really lovely assisted living communities. There's one in Dover that has a special wing for stroke recovery. It would be so much safer for you. The implication that she couldn't care for herself in her own home hit Evelyn like a physical blow. This was the home where she'd raised her children, where she'd nursed Thomas through his final illness, where every corner held memories of a life well lived. The thought of leaving it felt like another kind of stroke, a sudden, devastating loss. I appreciate your concern, Evelyn said carefully, but my doctors are very clear that I'm progressing well enough to remain independent. In my own home. Melissa's chopping became more forceful. Doctors don't see what family sees, Evelyn. They don't see how you're struggling. Michael notices how you favor your right side, how slowly you move in the mornings. He's worried sick about you, but he's too kind to push the issue. Evelyn felt a flicker of doubt. Was Michael really concerned, or was this Melissa's interpretation? Has Michael said this to you directly? Of course, Melissa replied without hesitation. We talk about it all the time. He feels so guilty about not being able to care for you properly with our busy schedules. An assisted living community would give us all peace of mind. Before Evelyn could respond, the side door opened again, and Michael returned, a large shopping bag in hand. Got the food processor. They only had the deluxe model, but the salesperson assured me it's worth every penny. Melissa rewarded him with a brilliant smile. You're the best, honey. Now I can finish this properly. The conversation shifted to safer topics as Melissa prepared what she described as a brain-healthy Mediterranean feast. Evelyn participated politely, but her mind kept returning to Melissa's comments. Was Michael truly worried about her ability to live independently? Had she been overestimating her progress? After lunch, which Melissa documented extensively with her phone camera for My Wellness blog, Michael insisted on handling the cleanup while Melissa gave Evelyn what she called a professional assessment of the house. These area rugs are accident waiting to happen, Melissa said, eyeing the Persian carpet in the living room that Thomas had brought back from a medical conference in Istanbul. And these end tables have such sharp corners. If you fell, I'm very careful, Evelyn assured her, increasingly uncomfortable with this unauthorized home inspection. And this furniture arrangement blocks natural flow, Melissa continued as if Evelyn hadn't spoken. No wonder you're having mobility issues. The whole house needs to be reconfigured for safety and efficiency. By the time the tour concluded, in Evelyn's bedroom, where Melissa criticized everything from the height of the bed to the depressing family photos on the dresser, Evelyn felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with her physical condition. I've made some notes, Melissa announced, tapping on her phone. I'll email you a list of recommended changes. Of course, the smartest thing would still be to consider that assisted living option. I have brochures in the car. Thank you for your concern, Evelyn said with the practiced patience of someone who had dealt with difficult family members of patients for decades. I'll certainly consider your suggestions. When Michael and Melissa finally departed, with promises to return soon with those brochures, Evelyn sank into her favorite armchair, the one Melissa had declared orthopedically inappropriate, and allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just occurred. For the first time since her stroke, she felt truly vulnerable, not because of her physical limitations, but because someone was using those limitations to question her autonomy and judgment. The sensation was both infuriating and frightening. Evelyn reached for the phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Margaret? It's Evelyn. Do you have time for a cup of tea tomorrow? I need to talk to an old friend. The next afternoon, Margaret Taylor's familiar knock at the side door brought a wave of relief. Margaret had been Evelyn's colleague at Beebe Healthcare for over 20 years, a fellow nurse who had risen to become the hospital's chief nursing officer before her retirement. More importantly, she had been Evelyn's confidant through Thomas's illness and death, and she understood the medical realities of stroke recovery better than most. You look good, Evie, Margaret said as she entered, her experienced nurse's eye conducting a swift assessment. Your color is better, and you're moving more smoothly than last month. Evelyn felt tears threatening at this simple, professional validation. Thank you for saying that. I needed to hear it from someone who knows what they're looking at. Over tea, Evelyn recounted the previous day's visit and Melissa's not-so-subtle suggestions about assisted living. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly concerned. Has your son actually expressed these concerns directly to you? Margaret asked when Evelyn finished. No, but Melissa seemed very certain that he's worried. Margaret's snort was decidedly unprofessional. In my experience, people who are busy undermining someone's independence often claim to speak for others who conveniently aren't present. The observation landed like a revelation. You think she's exaggerating Michael's concerns? I think, Margaret said carefully, that your daughter-in-law has her own agenda, and she's using your stroke as leverage. The question is why. Evelyn considered this. She's always been particular about appearances. Having a mother-in-law in assisted living might be more socially acceptable to her than one recovering from a stroke in an unfashionable colonial. Or, Margaret suggested, there might be more practical considerations. This house is in a prime location, isn't it? Waterfront property in Lewes doesn't come cheap these days. The implication sent a chill through Evelyn. You think she's interested in the house? I think people who casually suggest that others give up their homes often have thoughts about what should happen to those homes, Margaret replied. Have you updated your will since Thomas passed? The question caught Evelyn off guard. I haven't. With the kids grown and established in their careers, it seemed straightforward. Everything would go to Michael and Catherine equally. Catherine was Evelyn's daughter, a pediatrician practicing in Seattle. Unlike Michael, she had followed in her parents' medical footsteps, though she'd chosen a different specialty from her father's cardiology. It might be time to review those arrangements, Margaret suggested. Not to be morbid, but clarity about your wishes is important, especially when there are people who might try to make decisions for you. After Margaret left, Evelyn sat for a long time in her living room, watching the winter sun cast long shadows across the bay. The conversation had left her with a sense of unease but also clarity. She needed to take decisive action to protect her autonomy and ensure her wishes were respected. The next morning, she made 3 phone calls, one to her attorney, one to her financial advisor, and one to Dr. Wilson, her neurologist. If Melissa wanted to question her competence, Evelyn would make sure she had all the documentation necessary to prove otherwise. 2 days later, as Evelyn was returning from her physical therapy session, she was surprised to find Michael's SUV in her driveway again. This time, there was no sign of Melissa's BMW. Michael met her at the door, his face drawn with concern. "Mom, I wanted to check on you. Melissa said you seemed very confused during our visit the other day." Evelyn felt her blood pressure rise. "Confused? In what way?" Michael looked uncomfortable. "She said you kept forgetting things she told you, and that you seemed unsteady on your feet. She's worried the stroke might have affected your cognitive function more than the doctors realized." The accusation was so unexpected that Evelyn momentarily lost her words. She had been a critical care nurse for 35 years, had managed complex medical emergencies with precision and clarity. The suggestion that she couldn't accurately assess her own cognitive function was both insulting and alarming. "Michael," she said finally, keeping her voice calm through decades of professional practice, "I want you to listen carefully. I am not confused. My cognitive function was minimally affected by the stroke, and I've regained almost all of what was temporarily impaired. Dr. Wilson has conducted thorough neurological assessments at every follow-up appointment." Michael looked relieved but still uncertain. "That's what I thought," but Melissa seemed so concerned. "She's been researching stroke recovery extensively, and she says denial of cognitive issues is actually common." "I'm sure your wife means." "Well," Evelyn said carefully, "but I've spent my entire career in healthcare. I understand stroke recovery better than most, and I'm being monitored by excellent physicians who have no concerns about my cognitive function." Michael nodded, clearly torn between trusting his mother and his wife. "I just want what's best for you, Mom. If that means extra help or a different living situation, what I need," Evelyn interrupted gently, "is for my family to trust my judgment about my own health and well-being. I've always been honest with you about my condition, and I would tell you if I felt I needed more assistance." Michael seemed to accept this, and they spent a pleasant afternoon together. He helped with a few household tasks that were still challenging for Evelyn, changing light bulbs in high fixtures, moving some heavier items in the garage, and they talked about his research project and Catherine's latest news from Seattle. When he left, Evelyn felt cautiously optimistic. Perhaps Melissa had been well-intentioned but misguided in her concerns. Perhaps this could be resolved with better communication and clearer boundaries. That hope was shattered 3 days later when she received a call from her neighbor, Diane. "Evelyn, I thought you should know that your daughter-in-law was here yesterday while you were at your therapy appointment. She was showing someone around your house, a woman with a clipboard who looked very official." Evelyn's hand tightened on the phone. "Did you speak with them?" "I did. I was concerned, so I went over and introduced myself. Melissa said she was getting a professional assessment of the house for accessibility modifications that you had agreed to. But something felt off about it." After thanking Diane for her vigilance, Evelyn sat in stunned silence. What professional assessment could Melissa be conducting without her knowledge or consent? And why during a time when she knew Evelyn would be absent? The answer came in the form of a glossy brochure that arrived in her mail the next day. Coastal Haven, Premier Assisted Living on Delaware Shores. Inside was a handwritten note. "From Melissa, just wanted you to see the options we discussed. I've already put your name on their waiting list so you don't miss out on this opportunity." Zoxo. Evelyn stared at the brochure, then at the note, feeling a cold anger unlike anything she'd experienced since her stroke. Melissa hadn't just been making suggestions, she had been actively making arrangements behind Evelyn's back, presenting her decisions as foregone conclusions. The final straw came 2 days later when Michael called, his voice strained. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something Melissa found. She says there were unpaid bills hidden in your desk drawer, some dating back months. She's worried you're having trouble managing your finances since the stroke." Evelyn closed her eyes, understanding immediately what had happened. The unpaid bills were almost certainly the statements from her investment accounts that she kept in her desk until she transferred the information to her financial records. They weren't bills at all, but Melissa, who had apparently been going through her private papers, had either misunderstood or deliberately misrepresented them. "Michael," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I need to ask you something important. Was Melissa in my house yesterday while I was at physical therapy?" The long pause that followed was answer enough. "She was just trying to help," Michael finally said. "She wanted to organize some things for you, make it easier for you to find important documents. By going through my private papers without my knowledge or permission." Mom, she's concerned. We both are. If you're struggling with bills, I am not struggling with bills, Evelyn interrupted, her patience finally reaching its limit. What your wife found were investment statements, not unpaid bills. And the larger issue is that she was in my home, going through my personal belongings, when I wasn't present. Another uncomfortable silence. I think we need to have a family meeting, Evelyn said finally. You, me, and Melissa. It's time we clarified some boundaries and expectations. After arranging for the meeting to take place that weekend, Evelyn made one more call to her attorney, Edward Galloway, who had handled the Peterson family's legal matters for over 20 years. Ed, I need to make some changes to my will and establish a few other legal protections. How soon can we meet? The family meeting was set for Saturday afternoon. Evelyn spent the morning preparing, both emotionally and practically. She gathered her medical reports, financial statements, and the notes from her meeting with Ed Galloway. She made a simple lunch, moving around her kitchen with increasing confidence as her recovery progressed. At precisely 2 o'clock, Michael's SUV pulled into the driveway, followed by Melissa's BMW. Evelyn watched through the window as they approached the house, noting the tension in Michael's posture and the determined set of Melissa's shoulders. Mom, Michael began as soon as they were seated in the living room, before you say anything, I want you to know that everything we've done has been out of love and concern for you. Evelyn nodded, keeping her expression neutral. I understand that, Michael. And I appreciate genuine concern. But there's a difference between concern and control. Melissa shifted forward on the sofa. Evelyn, we're not trying to control you. We're trying to help you accept the reality of your situation. After a stroke at your age, independence isn't just challenging, it can be dangerous. At my age, Evelyn repeated, noting the phrase. I'm 68, Melissa, not 98. And my medical team has no concerns about my ability to live independently. Doctors don't see the daily struggles, Melissa insisted. They don't see how you favor your right side, how you need to rest after even simple tasks. Michael and I see it, and we're worried. Evelyn turned to her son. Michael, do you share these specific concerns? Michael looked uncomfortable. I worry about you being alone, especially after seeing what Dad went through. His heart attack was so sudden, and if you hadn't been there. That's a different situation entirely, Evelyn pointed out gently. Your father's heart condition was unpredictable. My stroke recovery is being carefully monitored, and I'm following all medical recommendations. But the bills, Michael began. Were not bills at all, Evelyn interrupted, pulling out the statements in question. These are investment reports that I review quarterly. They require no payment. They're records of assets that are performing quite well, actually. She handed the statements to Michael, who looked confused as he examined them. But Melissa said, I misunderstood, Melissa cut in quickly. They looked like bills to me. Which raises another issue, Evelyn continued. You were in my house, going through my private papers, without my knowledge or permission. That's not concern, Melissa. That's invasion of privacy. Melissa's face flushed. I was trying to help organize things. The house is so cluttered with outdated furniture and unnecessary items. And your filing system is chaotic. Anyone could see you're struggling to maintain order. My filing system has worked for me for decades, Evelyn replied. Just because it doesn't match your aesthetic preferences doesn't mean it's ineffective. Michael looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mom, we just want what's best for you. I understand that, Evelyn said, softening her tone as she turned to her son. But, what's best for me should be determined primarily by me, with input from my medical team, not based on assumptions about my capabilities. She pulled out the medical reports she had gathered. These are my latest assessments from Dr. Wilson, my physical therapist, and my occupational therapist. They all confirm that I'm making excellent progress and am fully capable of independent living with minimal adaptations. Michael took the reports, scanning them with genuine interest. While Melissa sat back, her expression guarded. There's another matter we need to discuss, Evelyn continued. Melissa, you put my name on a waiting list for an assisted living facility without my knowledge or consent. Michael's head snapped up. What? I thought we were just gathering information about options. Melissa's composure slipped slightly. The waiting lists are long, Michael. I was being proactive. We discussed this. We discussed researching options, Michael corrected, not making commitments. Evelyn watched the exchange with interest, noting the dynamics she had suspected but never directly observed. Melissa made decisions unilaterally but presented them as joint efforts. Michael, conflict-averse like his father, often went along to keep the peace. I've made some decisions of my own, Evelyn said when their exchange had run its course. I've updated my legal and financial arrangements to reflect my current situation. She explained the changes she had made with Ed Galloway's help, establishing a healthcare power of attorney that named Margaret as her medical decision-maker, creating a living will that clearly outlined her wishes, and setting up a trust to manage her assets. These arrangements ensure that my wishes will be respected, even if there comes a time when I cannot express them myself, she concluded. Melissa leaned forward again, her expression concerned but calculating. Evelyn, these are major decisions. Are you sure you've thought them through completely? In your condition, my condition, Evelyn interrupted firmly, includes full cognitive function and legal competence, as verified by my physicians and my attorney. I'm not asking for approval, Melissa. I'm informing you of decisions that have already been made. The afternoon continued with tense but necessary conversations about boundaries, respect, and family dynamics. By the time Michael and Melissa left, something fundamental had shifted. Michael seemed thoughtful, perhaps seeing his mother's strength and clarity for the first time since her stroke. Melissa was quieter than usual, her usual confidence somewhat diminished. As Evelyn waved goodbye from the doorway, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and liberation. Standing up for herself had required energy she wasn't sure she possessed, but having done so, she felt more like herself than she had since the stroke, not just a patient in recovery, but Evelyn Peterson, a woman of strength, dignity, and clear purpose. The next morning, she called Catherine in Seattle to update her on everything that had happened. Her daughter, always direct, didn't hide her anger. I'm flying out next weekend, Catherine announced. I want to see you, and I want to have a conversation with my brother and his wife. That's not necessary, Evelyn assured her. I've handled it. I have no doubt about that, Catherine replied with a laugh, but I'm coming anyway. I need to see for myself how you're doing, and I need to make sure Melissa understands that. She's dealing with both Peterson women, not just one. After ending the call, Evelyn stood by the window overlooking the bay, watching seabirds wheel against the winter sky. For the first time in months, she felt fully present in her body and her life, not defined by her stroke or limited by others' perceptions, but moving forward on her own terms, at her own pace. The recovery ahead would still have challenges. But she faced them now with renewed confidence, knowing that she had found her voice again. And that, perhaps, was the most important healing of all. Evelyn woke to the sound of hushed voices in her kitchen. Through the January morning stillness, she could hear Melissa's distinctive tone, crisp, authoritative, and tinged with frustration. It had been 3 weeks since their confrontation, and things had settled into an uneasy truce. Catherine's weekend visit had reinforced Evelyn's position, her daughter's medical expertise adding weight to her assertions of competence. She's not being realistic about her limitations, Melissa was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the old house's thin walls. The doctors are only seeing what she shows them during appointments. They don't see how she struggles every day. Kat thinks she's doing well, Michael responded, his voice lower and harder to hear. And she's a doctor, Mel. She's a pediatrician. Who lives across the country and spent 2 days here, Melissa countered dismissively. We're the ones who will have to pick up the pieces when something goes wrong. Evelyn slipped out of bed, moving with the deliberate care that had become second nature since her stroke. She reached for her robe, noting with satisfaction that buttoning it took less time than it had last week, another small victory in her ongoing recovery. By the time she entered the kitchen, Melissa had switched topics and was discussing renovation ideas while preparing coffee. Evelyn noticed she'd rearranged the coffee maker and mugs, continuing her campaign of subtle reorganization despite their previous conversation. Good morning, Evelyn said, making both of them jump slightly. What a nice surprise to find you here so early. Michael looked guilty, but Melissa recovered quickly. We thought we'd bring breakfast and check on you. Michael was worried when you didn't answer his call yesterday evening. I was at my support group, Evelyn explained, moving to reclaim her kitchen space. I mentioned it when we spoke on Tuesday. See, this is exactly what concerns me, Melissa said, turning to Michael with an expression of vindication. Memory lapses are common after strokes, but Evelyn doesn't seem to recognize when they're happening. The accusation hung in the air, its implications far more serious than a forgotten phone call. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken but kept her voice steady as she replied. I didn't have a memory lapse, Melissa. I told Michael about the support group during our Tuesday call. Perhaps he forgot. Michael frowned, clearly trying to recall the conversation. Maybe you did mention it. Things have been hectic at work, and I've been distracted. Or perhaps Evelyn thinks she mentioned it, Melissa suggested gently, her tone conveying sympathy rather than accusation, which somehow made it worse. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. Cognitive fluctuations are normal during recovery. Evelyn recognized the tactic immediately. By framing every disagreement as evidence of Evelyn's cognitive decline, Melissa created a situation where defending herself only reinforced the narrative of denial. It was a subtle form of gaslighting that Evelyn had seen family members use on vulnerable patients, and it filled her with cold fury. "I keep a calendar," Evelyn said calmly, retrieving the notebook from its place by the phone. "I write down all appointments and calls. Here's Tuesday's entry: called Michael, discussed weekend plans and Thursday support group." She showed the clear, steady handwriting to her son, whose frown deepened as he read it. "You're right, Mom. You did tell me. I'm sorry I forgot." Melissa's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, that's good to hear. We're just concerned because isolated seniors often miss important social connections. That's why we've been researching those senior communities. They provide such wonderful social opportunities." "I am neither isolated nor missing social connections," Evelyn replied, her nurse's calm still intact despite her growing irritation. "I have my support group, my church activities, my neighbors, and my former colleagues." The conversation shifted to safer topics as they shared the breakfast Melissa had brought, artisanal pastries and expensive coffee that Evelyn found unnecessarily complicated compared to her simple preferences. Throughout the meal, she noticed Melissa's eyes constantly surveying the kitchen, mentally cataloging everything that didn't meet her standards. After Michael and Melissa left, promising to return for dinner the following week, Evelyn called Margaret. "She's escalating," Evelyn said without preamble when her friend answered. "Now she's suggesting I'm having memory lapses and cognitive fluctuations." Margaret's sigh carried decades of professional frustration. Classic. When you can't control someone with concern, try convincing them, and everyone around them, that they're mentally incompetent. "Michael's caught in the middle," Evelyn added. "He trusts me, but Melissa is very convincing. And he's always been conflict-averse. Like Thomas," Margaret observed. "Good men who want everyone to get along, even when getting along means someone gets steamrolled." The comparison was painfully accurate. Thomas had been a brilliant cardiologist but had avoided confrontation at all costs. His ability to maintain peace had been both his greatest strength and most significant blind spot in their marriage. "What's your next move?" Margaret asked. Evelyn considered the question carefully. "I've secured my legal and financial protections. Catherine's visit helped reinforce my competence with Michael. Now I need to focus on strengthening my recovery so there's no room for doubt. And if Melissa continues questioning your cognitive function, then I'll need to be more direct about the consequences of undermining my autonomy," Evelyn said, surprising herself with her own firmness. "I've been accommodating because I love Michael and want peace in the family. But I won't allow anyone to use my health challenges to take control of my life." Over the next few weeks, Evelyn doubled down on her recovery efforts. She worked with her physical therapist to develop a more rigorous home exercise program. She joined an additional stroke recovery support group that focused specifically on cognitive maintenance. She asked her neurologist, Dr. Wilson, to perform a comprehensive cognitive assessment, which confirmed what she already knew: her mental faculties were essentially intact, with only minor processing delays that were continuing to improve. Most importantly, she began documenting everything: her medical appointments, therapy sessions, conversations with family members, daily activities, and recovery milestones. The journal became both a tool for tracking her progress and a record that could refute any future claims about her memory or cognitive function. February arrived with a brief warming trend that allowed Evelyn to spend more time outside, tending to the winter preparations for her beloved garden. Thomas had been the gardener initially, but after his death, Evelyn had discovered unexpected solace in nurturing the coastal plants that thrived in Delaware's unique climate. The physical work challenged her recovering body in productive ways, and the connection to nature soothed her spirit. She was pruning the dormant rose bushes one mild afternoon when a sleek black sedan pulled into her driveway. For a moment, she feared it was Melissa arriving unannounced again, but instead, a tall, distinguished man in his early 70s emerged from the driver's side. "Edward," she called in greeting, recognizing her attorney. "This is an unexpected pleasure." Edward Galloway approached with the measured pace of someone who had never been in a hurry his entire life. "Evelyn, you're looking well. Recovery clearly agrees with you. What brings you all the way out here?" she asked, gesturing for him to join her on the garden bench that overlooked the bay. "Our next appointment isn't for 2 weeks. Edward's expression grew serious as he settled beside her. "Something has come to my attention that I felt warranted an immediate conversation rather than a phone call." Evelyn felt a flutter of concern. "That sounds ominous." "Perhaps not ominous, but certainly concerning." He removed a folder from his briefcase. "A colleague in real estate law contacted me yesterday. He'd been consulted about a potential property transaction involving this address." Evelyn stared at him, momentarily unable to process what he was saying. This address? My home? Edward nodded grimly. It seems someone has been making inquiries about the potential market value of your property and exploring options for a quick sale pending resolution of certain health considerations. The implication struck Evelyn like a physical blow. Melissa, she said, not a question but a certainty. The inquiries came from a Melissa Peterson, yes. Edward confirmed. My colleague became concerned when Ms. Peterson mentioned that the current owner was experiencing cognitive decline following a stroke but hadn't been formally evaluated for competency. Evelyn's hands tightened around her garden shears. That is absolutely false. My cognitive function has been formally evaluated multiple times since my stroke, and all assessments show minimal impairment with continued improvement. I explained as much to my colleague, Edward assured her. I also informed him that you have comprehensive legal protections in place, including the trust we established. Your home cannot be sold without your explicit consent while you are alive and competent, which you very clearly are. Evelyn felt a complex mixture of emotions, rage at Melissa's breathtaking overreach, hurt that her daughter-in-law would so deliberately misrepresent her condition, and a deep, aching concern for what this revelation would do to Michael when he learned of it. Does my son know about this? She asked quietly. Edward's hesitation told her everything before he spoke. Miss Peterson presented herself as acting on behalf of both your son and herself, as your concerned family members. However, I cannot verify whether your son is actually aware of these inquiries. He's not, Evelyn said with certainty. Michael would never approve of this. I thought as much, Edward replied. Which is why I came directly to you. You need to be fully informed about what's happening behind the scenes. After Edward left, Evelyn remained on the garden bench for a long time, watching seabirds wheel above the bay as she processed the magnitude of Melissa's betrayal. This wasn't well-intentioned concern or even misguided overprotectiveness. This was a calculated attempt to seize control of her most significant asset under the guise of health concerns. The realization crystallized something that had been forming in Evelyn's mind since her stroke, the understanding that protecting her independence wasn't just about asserting her autonomy. It was about safeguarding everything she and Thomas had built together from those who would take advantage of perceived vulnerability. That evening, she called Catherine in Seattle. Mom, you sound upset, her daughter said immediately. What's happened? Evelyn explained Edward's visit and Melissa's inquiries about selling the house. Catherine's response was immediate and emphatic. This is elder abuse, Mom. Attempting to sell someone's property by falsely claiming cognitive impairment is criminal. We need to confront this head-on. I need to speak with Michael first, Evelyn insisted. He deserves to hear this from me before we take any other steps. And if he doesn't believe you? If he thinks you're confused or misunderstood Edward? The question hurt, but Evelyn recognized its validity. Then I'll have Edward speak with him directly. And I'll reconsider my estate planning decisions. The following day, Evelyn called Michael at work, asking him to visit alone that evening. His immediate concern was palpable even over the phone. Is everything okay, Mom? Are you feeling worse? I'm fine, she assured him. But there's something important we need to discuss, and I'd prefer to do it in person. Should Melissa come too? She's been researching some new therapies that might. Just you, please, Michael, Evelyn interrupted gently. This is between us. The uncertainty in his pause spoke volumes about the dynamics she was challenging. Okay, Mom. I'll come over after work. Michael arrived just after 6, his face tight with worry as he entered the kitchen where Evelyn was preparing tea. She had deliberately chosen this setting, the heart of the home where they had shared so many family moments, for the difficult conversation ahead. Mom, what's going on? You're scaring me a little. Evelyn gestured for him to sit at the kitchen table. I received some disturbing information yesterday, and I need to discuss it with you before deciding how to proceed. She explained Edward's visit and the revelation about Melissa's inquiries regarding selling the house, watching her son's expression shift from confusion to disbelief to a dawning horror. There must be some mistake, he said when she finished. Melissa wouldn't, she couldn't, not without talking to me first. I hope there was a misunderstanding too, Evelyn said gently. But Edward's colleague was very clear about who made the inquiries and what was said about my cognitive condition. Michael's face had gone pale. She told someone you were cognitively impaired? Mom, I swear I knew nothing about this. We've talked about being concerned for your recovery, but never about selling the house or claiming you're mentally compromised. I believe you, Evelyn said, reaching across the table to take his hand. But this situation has forced me to reevaluate some things, including my estate plans. Michael looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean that I need to protect myself and my assets from anyone who might try to take advantage of my health situation, Evelyn explained. I've worked too hard for too long to allow that to happen. You're talking about disinheriting me, Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm talking about ensuring that my wishes are respected and my legacy is protected, Evelyn corrected. I haven't made any final decisions yet. I wanted to speak with you first. What does Melissa say about all this? Michael asked. I haven't confronted her yet, Evelyn admitted. I thought you deserved to hear it from me first, and to have the opportunity to address it with her yourself. Michael sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing everything he'd learned. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new edge that reminded Evelyn startlingly of Thomas when he'd been truly angry, a rare but formidable state. I'll talk to her tonight, he said. I need to understand what she was thinking. Michael, Evelyn said carefully, I don't want to come between you and your wife. Marriage is complex, and I respect your relationship. This isn't about our marriage, Michael replied. This is about honesty and respect for you. If Melissa did what you're describing, she crossed a fundamental line. After Michael left, Evelyn felt drained but resolute. The conversation had been painful but necessary, laying bare uncomfortable truths that could no longer be ignored. Whatever happened next would depend largely on how Michael handled the revelation and how Melissa responded to being confronted. She didn't have to wait long to find out. Just after 9 o'clock that evening, her doorbell rang insistently. When she opened the door, Melissa stood on the porch, her expression a mixture of fury and defensiveness, with Michael standing several steps behind her, his face grim. How dare you? Melissa began without preamble. How dare you make these ridiculous accusations and turn my husband against me? Evelyn stepped back, allowing them to enter but maintaining her composure. I haven't made accusations, Melissa. I shared factual information that was brought to my attention by my attorney. Your attorney shouldn't be discussing private matters with you in your condition, Melissa snapped, following Evelyn into the living room. It's completely irresponsible. My condition doesn't affect my legal competence, Evelyn reminded her calmly. Which my neurologist has documented thoroughly. Michael stepped forward. Melissa, stop. We're here so you can explain why you were inquiring about selling Mom's house without telling me. Melissa's strategy shifted instantly, her expression softening as she turned to Michael. I was just gathering information, honey. You've been so worried about your mother, and I thought if we understood all the options, we could present them to her in a way that wouldn't cause stress. By telling a real estate attorney that she's cognitively impaired, Michael pressed. I never said that, Melissa insisted. I expressed concern about her decision-making capacity after a major health event, which any responsible family member would do. Evelyn watched this exchange with the detached clinical assessment she'd developed over decades of nursing. Melissa was backpedaling, reframing her actions as well-intentioned concern rather than the calculated overreach they represented. Edward's colleague was very specific about what was said, Evelyn noted quietly. And about who said it. Lawyers misunderstand things all the time, Melissa dismissed with a wave of her hand. I was exploring options, not making plans. And frankly, Evelyn, the fact that you immediately assumed the worst about me says more about your state of mind than about my intentions. The deflection was skillful, shifting blame, suggesting that Evelyn's concerns were symptoms of paranoia rather than legitimate grievances. It was a tactic Evelyn had seen countless times when someone was caught in wrongdoing but refused to acknowledge responsibility. Melissa, Michael said, his voice carrying a new firmness. I need you to be honest right now. Did you not suggest to anyone that my mother's house might be available for sale soon because of her health issues? The directness of the question left little room for evasion. Melissa's expression flickered between defiance and calculation before settling into something resembling contrition. I might have mentioned that we were concerned about her ability to maintain the property long-term, she admitted. But only because we care about her well-being. This house is too much for someone in her condition, the stairs, the maintenance, the isolation. I was trying to be proactive about solutions. Solutions that conveniently weren't discussed with me, Evelyn pointed out. Or with Michael, apparently. I was going to bring it up when I had all the information, Melissa insisted. I didn't want to worry either of you unnecessarily. Michael shook his head slowly, disappointment evident in every line of his face. That's not how we make decisions in this family, Mel. Especially not decisions about someone else's home and life. I was trying to help, Melissa repeated, tears welling in her eyes. Everything I've done has been to help this family. Evelyn watched her son's reaction carefully, seeing the conflict in his expression. Michael had always been sensitive to others' distress, quick to offer comfort even when it came at his own expense. It was what made him an excellent marine biologist, attuned to the delicate balances of ecosystems, but it also made him vulnerable to manipulation. I know you think you were helping, Michael said finally. But this isn't help, Melissa. This is control. And it stops now. The firmness in his voice seemed to surprise both Melissa and Evelyn. This was a side of Michael that rarely emerged, the quiet strength that usually remained buried beneath his easygoing exterior. "We're going home," he continued. "Mom needs rest, and we need to have a serious conversation about boundaries and respect." As they prepared to leave, Melissa turned to Evelyn with a final attempt to salvage the situation. "I hope you'll reconsider your position, Evelyn. Families should work together during difficult times, not turn against each other over misunderstandings." "I couldn't agree more," Evelyn replied calmly. "Which is why I'm looking forward to working with family members who respect my autonomy. And tell me the truth." The implication was clear, and Melissa's expression hardened momentarily before she composed herself and walked out ahead of Michael. After they left, Evelyn sat in her favorite chair by the window, watching their car lights disappear down the street. The confrontation had been draining but necessary, forcing issues into the open that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. She thought of Thomas and how he would have handled this situation. Despite his aversion to conflict, he had been fiercely protective when it truly mattered. "Know your worth," he had often told her. "And never let anyone convince you it's less than it is." In the quiet of her home, the home they had shared for 40 years, the home where they had raised their children and built their life together, Evelyn made a decision. She would not allow anyone, no matter how well-intentioned they claimed to be, to diminish her agency or undermine her independence. Tomorrow, she would call Edward and begin the process of revising her estate plans. Not out of spite or anger, but out of the clear-eyed recognition that her legacy deserved protection, and that true love included accountability. Outside, the February wind had picked up, carrying the scent of the bay and the promise of spring still to come. Evelyn stood and moved through her house with growing confidence, each step another small victory in her ongoing recovery. Whatever happened next with Michael and Melissa, she would face it with the strength she had always possessed, a strength that no stroke, no challenge, and no daughter-in-law could take from her. The March wind carried a hint of spring as Evelyn made her way up the stone path to Beebe Healthcare's outpatient rehabilitation center. 3 months had passed since her confrontation with Melissa, and much had changed in ways she couldn't have anticipated. The weekly therapy sessions that had once seemed overwhelming now felt like milestones in a journey that was increasingly defined by progress rather than limitations. "Look at that stride, Evelyn," called Diane Ramirez, her physical therapist, watching her approach from the entrance. "Someone's been doing her home exercises." Evelyn smiled, conscious of the improved fluidity in her movements. "Every morning and evening, just as prescribed." Inside, as Diane put her through a series of increasingly challenging balance exercises, Evelyn reflected on the transformation of the past few months. The revision of her estate plans had been just the beginning, the first decisive step in reclaiming not just her independence, but her sense of purpose. "You're holding this position almost twice as long as last week," Diane noted, stopwatch in hand as Evelyn maintained a difficult single-leg stance. "What's your secret?" "Determination," Evelyn replied. "And perhaps a little righteous indignation." Diane laughed, familiar with the outlines of Evelyn's family situation from their many sessions together. "Nothing motivates recovery like proving someone wrong, does it?" "It's not about proving Melissa wrong," Evelyn clarified, though the thought had certainly crossed her mind. "It's about proving myself right, that I know my own mind and body better than anyone else." After completing her therapy session, Evelyn had another appointment, one that represented the newest chapter in her recovery journey. Rather than heading home, she made her way to another wing of the hospital complex, where a bright office door bore the sign, Stroke Recovery Advocacy Program. Inside, Dr. Yasmin Khan, the program's director, greeted her warmly. "Evelyn. Right. On time. The group is already gathering." The meeting room held a diverse assembly of stroke survivors, some clearly in early stages of recovery with more visible physical effects, others further along like Evelyn. What united them was not their medical condition but their shared commitment to improving stroke care and recovery support in their community. "Before we begin our advocacy planning," Dr. Khan announced, "I'd like to welcome our newest committee member, Evelyn Peterson, who brings 35 years of nursing experience and her personal stroke recovery journey to our work." The group applauded, and Evelyn felt a surge of purpose as she took her seat at the table. When she'd mentioned to Dr. Wilson her frustration with how stroke survivors were often infantilized by family members, he'd immediately connected her with Dr. Khan's advocacy program. "Many patients struggle to maintain autonomy during recovery," she explained to the group when asked to share her perspective. "Medical professionals understand the importance of patient agency, but families often default to protection over empowerment, sometimes with the best intentions." A younger survivor nodded vigorously. "My parents started making all my decisions, like I'd lost my ability to think, not just movement on my left side." "Exactly," Evelyn agreed. That's why I believe our advocacy work needs to include family education, helping loved ones understand how to support recovery without undermining independence. As the meeting progressed, Evelyn found herself fully engaged in a way she hadn't experienced since retirement. Her clinical expertise combined with her personal experience created insights that the group found valuable, and she left with an assignment to develop a family education component for their upcoming community workshop. Driving home along the coastal road, Evelyn felt a sense of fulfillment that transcended her ongoing recovery challenges. The stroke had taken things from her, certainly, some dexterity, some stamina, some fluid movement. But it had also revealed strengths she'd forgotten. She possessed and opened doors to new purpose. When she arrived home, there was a message on her answering machine from Catherine. "Mom, call me as soon as you can. I've got news about Michael." Catherine answered on the first ring. "Mom, I've been trying to reach you all afternoon. I had physical therapy followed by my advocacy committee meeting," Evelyn explained. "What's happening with Michael?" Catherine's voice carried a mixture of concern and satisfaction. "He called me last night. He and Melissa are separating." Evelyn sank into her kitchen chair, stunned. "Separating? He didn't mention anything about this when we spoke on Sunday." "It's very new," Catherine said. "Apparently, after the confrontation at your house, things got worse between them. Michael started questioning other situations where Melissa had managed things without his knowledge. He discovered she'd been intercepting some of your cards and letters to him, claiming she was screening your correspondence for signs of cognitive issues." "She what?" Evelyn felt a chill at this new revelation. "Which cards and letters?" "The birthday card you sent in January, for one. And apparently some letters about family history you'd written that he never received. She told him you hadn't sent anything, which he thought was odd but attributed to your recovery challenges." The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. Evelyn thought of the careful letters she'd written to Michael after discovering Thomas's old journals in the attic, personal reflections and family stories she'd wanted to share with her son. All intercepted by Melissa, presumably discarded or hidden. "There's more," Catherine continued. "Michael started therapy about a month ago, and his therapist helped him recognize patterns of controlling behavior in their relationship that went beyond just the situation with you. When he confronted Melissa, she apparently became defensive and then accusatory, claiming he was abandoning her when she was just trying to manage their future security." Evelyn absorbed this information slowly, her thoughts turning immediately to her son's well-being. "How is he doing?" "Shaken but resolute," Catherine replied. "He's staying with his colleague Doug for now while they sort out next steps. He wanted me to tell you that he'll call you tomorrow. He's meeting with a lawyer today." After ending the call with Catherine, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table for a long time, processing this unexpected development. She had never wished for Michael's marriage to end, had, in fact, gone to great lengths to maintain family harmony despite Melissa's behavior. But she couldn't deny a sense of validation that Michael had finally recognized the manipulation for what it was. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she was surprised to find Margaret on her porch, holding a bottle of wine and wearing an expression of fierce determination. "Catherine called me," Margaret explained, stepping inside. "I figured you could use a friend tonight." They settled in the living room with glasses of wine, the comfortable ease of 30 years of friendship allowing silence when needed and conversation when ready. "I never wanted this for Michael," Evelyn said finally. "As difficult as Melissa could be, I hoped they would find a way forward together." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "You can support someone's marriage while still opposing their harmful behavior. Those aren't contradictory positions." "I keep thinking about what I could have done differently," Evelyn admitted. "If I'd been more direct earlier, less accommodating of her suggestions." "Stop that right now," Margaret interrupted firmly. "You navigated an impossible situation with grace and restraint. You set appropriate boundaries, you protected yourself legally, and you gave both Michael and Melissa every opportunity to adjust their approach. What happened in their marriage goes far beyond their relationship with you." Evelyn sipped her wine, considering this perspective. "I suppose you're right." Catherine mentioned that Michael's therapist helped him identify larger patterns of controlling behavior. "That doesn't surprise me," Margaret said. "People who try to control others rarely limit it to just one relationship or context. It's a worldview, not an isolated behavior." The conversation shifted to Evelyn's advocacy work, her improving health, and plans for spring planting in her garden. By the time Margaret left, Evelyn felt centered again, reminded that life's challenges, even painful ones involving family, could be navigated with integrity and grace. Michael called the next morning as promised, his voice tired but steadier than Evelyn had expected given the circumstances. "Mom, I owe you an apology," he began. "A big one." You don't owe me anything, Evelyn assured him. I'm just concerned about you right now. I should have seen what was happening, he insisted. The way Melissa was undermining you, questioning your competence, trying to control your life while claiming it was for your own good. And I let it happen because it was easier than confronting the truth. Evelyn recognized the self-recrimination in his voice. It was so like Thomas when he felt he'd failed to protect someone he loved. Michael, listen to me. You were caught in an impossible position between your wife and your mother. The fact that you eventually recognized what was happening and took action shows your character. It shouldn't have taken so long, Michael said, the frustration evident in his voice. After that night at your house, I started paying more attention to how Melissa operated, not just with you, but with everyone. The way she'd make decisions unilaterally but present them as joint efforts. The way she'd isolate me from people who didn't align with her plans. My therapist calls it coercive control. Evelyn felt a deep sadness at what her son had been experiencing. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. That must have been incredibly difficult to recognize and address. The hardest part was realizing how much I'd enabled it, Michael admitted. But that's not why I called. I wanted you to know that I've spoken with Edward Galloway. I know about the changes you made to your estate plans. Evelyn tensed slightly. After her confrontation with Melissa, she had indeed revised her will, establishing a more complex trust structure that ensured her assets would be protected and distributed according to her wishes. The revisions included significantly reduced direct inheritance for Michael, with his portion primarily held in trust with specific conditions. I want you to know that I completely understand and support your decision, Michael continued before she could respond. You did what you needed to do to protect yourself, and I respect that. The simple acceptance in his voice brought tears to Evelyn's eyes. I never wanted to hurt you, Michael. But after what happened, you did exactly the right thing, he assured her. And honestly, it was another wake-up call for me. It made me realize how serious the situation had become. They talked for almost an hour, Michael sharing more details about his separation and Evelyn updating him on her recovery progress and new advocacy work. By the time they hung up, Evelyn felt a weight lifting, not just the immediate concern for Michael's well-being, but the deeper tension that had been straining their relationship for months. Later that afternoon, Evelyn decided to tackle a project she'd been contemplating since her stroke. Thomas's study remained largely as he had left it, filled with medical journals, research papers, and the personal mementos of a life devoted to healing. She had preserved it as a kind of shrine after his death, but now it felt like an unused space in a home that could serve her current needs better. With careful deliberation, she began transforming the study into a combined therapy and advocacy workspace. She kept Thomas's desk, the solid cherry piece where he'd written countless patient notes and research proposals, but reorganized the room to accommodate her physical therapy equipment and the materials for her stroke advocacy work. As she sorted through Thomas's papers, deciding what to archive and what to let go, she found a folder labeled Evelyn's Career in his meticulous handwriting. Inside were newspaper clippings, hospital newsletter mentions, and awards ceremonies. Programs, a chronicle of her nursing career that she hadn't realized he'd been keeping. At the back of the folder was a letter, sealed but addressed to her in Thomas's handwriting. With trembling fingers, she opened it, recognizing it as something he must have written during his final illness. My dearest Evelyn, it began. If you're reading this, I've left you to face life's challenges without me at your side. I have complete faith in your strength and resilience, but I know you well enough to worry that you might diminish yourself after I'm gone, might forget the extraordinary woman you are beyond being my wife and our children's mother. Tears blurred her vision as she continued reading his final words to her. You've spent your life taking care of others, our family, your patients, your community. You've done it with such quiet competence that people sometimes take your strength for granted. Don't let anyone convince you that you are less capable, less intelligent, or less valuable than you truly are. And don't let my absence become a reason to make yourself smaller. The letter continued, filled with Thomas's characteristic blend of practical advice and deep affection. By the time she finished reading, Evelyn was weeping openly, not from grief, but from the profound recognition that Thomas had understood her so completely and had tried, even from beyond death, to protect her from exactly the situation she'd faced with Melissa. She placed the letter carefully in her own files, a treasure to revisit in difficult moments. Then she returned to the task of transforming the study, now even more certain that she was honoring Thomas's memory not by preserving his space unchanged, but by adapting it to support her continued growth and contribution. By early evening, the room had taken on a new character, still containing elements of Thomas's presence, but now clearly a space for Evelyn's recovery and advocacy work. The bookshelves held a mixture of his medical references and her new collection of stroke recovery and patient advocacy resources. His diplomas shared wall space with her nursing credentials and the certificate from her recent appointment to the State Stroke Advisory Council. As she stood in the doorway, surveying the transformed space, Evelyn felt a sense of rightness. This room, like her life, honored the past while embracing a future she was actively creating on her own terms. The following week brought an unexpected visitor. Evelyn was working in her garden, taking advantage of an unusually warm March day to prepare the soil for spring planting, when a familiar silver BMW pulled into her driveway. Her heart raced as Melissa emerged, looking uncharacteristically subdued in simple jeans and a sweater rather than her usual carefully curated outfits. Evelyn straightened, gardening trowel still in hand, and waited as Melissa approached across the lawn. "Evelyn," Melissa began, stopping a respectful distance away. "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to speak with you in person." "That depends on the purpose of your visit," Evelyn replied, neither hostile nor welcoming. Melissa glanced at the garden bed where Evelyn had been working. "Your garden is coming along beautifully. I never appreciated how much skill and planning it takes to create something like this." The comment, seemingly genuine in its admiration, caught Evelyn off guard. "Thank you. It's been a labor of love for many years." An awkward silence stretched between them before Melissa spoke again. "I owe you an apology, Evelyn. A sincere one, not the kind I've offered in the past when I was just trying to smooth things over." Evelyn remained silent, waiting. She had learned through decades of nursing that people reveal more when given space to fill silence. "What I did was wrong," Melissa continued, her voice less polished than usual. "Not just the real estate inquiries, but all of it, trying to control your life, questioning your competence, treating you like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. There's no excuse for any of it." "Why did you do it?" Evelyn asked, the question that had been troubling her for months. Melissa looked away, gazing out toward the bay. "I've been asking myself the same question in therapy. The easy answer is that I was worried about Michael having to shoulder your care if your condition worsened. But that's not the whole truth." She paused, seeming to gather courage before continuing. "The reality is that I've spent my entire life trying to control my environment and the people in it. My parents' divorce was chaotic and bitter. I promised myself I'd never experience that kind of helplessness again." Evelyn nodded, understanding this perspective better than Melissa might have expected. She'd seen similar patterns in families dealing with medical crises, the way past trauma could shape responses to current challenges. "Control feels like safety," Melissa admitted. "And when you had your stroke, it triggered all my fears about unpredictability and loss. Instead of supporting you, I tried to manage you, to fit you into a narrative where I could predict and direct the outcome." The self-awareness in this confession surprised Evelyn. "That's a significant realization." "It's come at a significant cost," Melissa said quietly. "My marriage, my self-respect, relationships with people I genuinely care about despite how poorly I've treated them." She looked directly at Evelyn then, her expression stripped of its usual confident facade. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I caused, I take full responsibility for it, and I'm working to understand and change the patterns that led to my behavior." Evelyn studied her daughter-in-law, former daughter-in-law soon. She supposed, seeing for perhaps the first time the vulnerable person beneath the controlling exterior. "Thank you for telling me this. It can't have been easy to come here." "It wasn't," Melissa acknowledged. "But it was necessary. For what it's worth, I admire how you've handled your recovery and how you stood your ground when I was trying to override your autonomy. It's taught me something important about resilience." After Melissa left, Evelyn returned to her gardening, turning over soil that had lain dormant through the winter but was now awakening with spring's approach. The conversation had left her thoughtful but not upset, a testament to her own healing process, both physical and emotional. That evening, she called Catherine to share the unexpected visit. "She actually apologized?" Catherine asked, clearly skeptical. "A real apology, not one of those, 'I'm sorry you feel that way' non-apologies?" "A real apology," Evelyn confirmed. "With insight and accountability. She's in therapy, apparently." Catherine mused. "People can change, I suppose, though I'm not holding my breath in Melissa's case. How do you feel about it?" Evelyn considered the question carefully. Cautiously optimistic for her sake, though realistic about what it means for our family. "I don't expect us to become close, but I appreciate that she's trying to understand her behavior." "And what about Michael? Will this change your estate plans again?" "That's a complex question," Evelyn admitted. "I'll need to think about it carefully. The changes I made weren't just about Melissa's behavior, they were about ensuring my wishes would be respected regardless of who was involved." After ending the call with Catherine, Evelyn went to the newly reorganized study and opened her journal. She had maintained the practice of daily writing since her stroke, finding it both therapeutic and clarifying. Tonight, she had much to process: Melissa's apology, Michael's separation, her own evolving priorities. As she wrote, a passage from Thomas's letter came back to her: "Don't let anyone convince you that you are less capable, less intelligent, or less valuable than you truly are." She hadn't. Despite Melissa's attempts to diminish her autonomy, despite the genuine challenges of stroke recovery, despite moments of doubt and vulnerability, she had maintained her sense of self-worth and her commitment to living on her own terms. The victory wasn't in proving Melissa wrong or in the changes to her estate plans. It was in the daily choice to honor her own wisdom and experience, to trust her own assessment of her capabilities, and to insist on the dignity of self-determination. Outside her window, the March wind rustled through trees that were just beginning to bud with new life. Inside, Evelyn Peterson continued writing her story, not the one others had tried to impose on her, but the one she was authoring herself, stroke and all, with clarity, purpose, and an unshakable belief in her own worth. Evelyn stood at the podium, her notes arranged neatly before her, as she surveyed the audience gathered in Beebe Healthcare's Community Education Center. 6 months had passed since her stroke, and today marked a milestone she couldn't have imagined during those first frightening days in the hospital. She was the keynote speaker at the Delaware Stroke Recovery Symposium, addressing an audience of healthcare professionals, stroke survivors, and family caregivers. "Recovery isn't just about regaining physical function," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It's about reclaiming your voice, your autonomy, and your right to self-determination. As healthcare providers, we must remember that beneath every patient file is a person with a lifetime of wisdom and agency that deserves our respect." From the front row, Margaret gave her an encouraging nod, while Dr. Wilson watched with evident pride. In the middle of the audience, Michael sat beside Catherine, who had flown in specifically for this event. Even Edward Galloway had come, representing the growing coalition of elder law advocates who had joined forces with the stroke recovery program. "The greatest challenge many stroke survivors face isn't the physical recovery," Evelyn continued. "It's the subtle and not so subtle ways that well-meaning people try to take control of our lives, making decisions about our care, our living situations, and our futures without fully consulting us." She paused, meeting the eyes of several survivors in the audience who nodded in vigorous agreement. "I speak both as a healthcare professional with 35 years of nursing experience and as a stroke survivor. And I'm here to tell you that the most powerful medicine for recovery is dignity, the dignity that comes from being truly heard, truly seen, and truly respected as the expert on your own life." The symposium had been Dr. Kahn's idea, but Evelyn had embraced it wholeheartedly, helping to design a program that addressed not just the medical aspects of stroke recovery but the personal, social, and legal dimensions as well. Her advocacy work had expanded beyond what she'd initially imagined, evolving into a comprehensive approach to patient empowerment that was gaining attention throughout Delaware's healthcare community. After her presentation, as attendees mingled during the refreshment break, Catherine approached with obvious pride. "Mom, that was incredible. You had everyone in that room hanging on your every word." Evelyn smiled, feeling the pleasant fatigue that followed public speaking. "It's easier to be compelling when you've lived what you're talking about." "It's more than that," Catherine insisted. "You've always had this quiet authority, but now there's something different, a kind of fearlessness that's powerful to witness." Michael joined them, wrapping an arm around Evelyn's shoulders. "Catherine's right. You were always strong, Mom, but this is next-level strength." Evelyn studied her son's face, noting the positive changes of the past few months. The shadows under his eyes had disappeared, and his smile came more readily. The separation from Melissa had been finalized, and though the divorce proceedings were still underway, Michael had moved into his own apartment and seemed to be rebuilding his life with newfound confidence. "How are you doing, really?" she asked him quietly while Catherine stepped away to speak with Dr. Wilson. Michael considered the question seriously. "Better than I expected, honestly. My therapist says I'm making good progress with recognizing some of the patterns I'd fallen into. It's not always easy, but it feels right." "And the research position? Any news?" His face brightened. "That's actually why I wanted to catch you alone for a minute. I got it. The university approved the grant for the extended study. 2 years of fully funded research on climate adaptation in coastal ecosystems." "Oh, Michael, that's wonderful," Evelyn exclaimed, genuinely thrilled. Michael had been working toward this opportunity for years, but Melissa had always discouraged him from pursuing it, considering academic research less prestigious and profitable than private sector work. "It means I'll be staying in Delaware permanently," he added. No more talk of relocating to Chicago or New York. The news lifted Evelyn's heart. Having Michael nearby had always been a comfort, but now it felt especially meaningful as they rebuilt their relationship on stronger, more honest foundations. The afternoon continued with breakout sessions where Evelyn facilitated a discussion group for family members of stroke survivors. She had specifically requested this assignment, knowing that family dynamics could make or break a successful recovery process. The hardest lesson for many families, she told the group, is learning the difference between helping and controlling. True help empowers the stroke survivor to reclaim independence wherever possible. Control, even when well-intentioned, undermines recovery by reinforcing dependency. A middle-aged woman raised her hand. But what if your loved one is being unrealistic about their capabilities? My mother insists she can still live alone after her stroke, but I'm terrified she'll fall or have another stroke when no one's there. Evelyn nodded, recognizing the genuine concern behind the question. That's a valid fear, and it's one my own family faced. The key is to address the specific risks with targeted solutions rather than assuming complete independence is impossible. She shared practical strategies, medical alert systems, home modifications, visiting care schedules, that preserved autonomy while mitigating risks. Throughout the discussion, she emphasized the importance of honest, respectful communication between survivors and family members. The goal isn't to eliminate all risk, she concluded. It's to balance safety with dignity, independence with support. And that balance will look different for every survivor and every family. By the end of the symposium, Evelyn was exhausted but exhilarated. What had begun as a personal journey of recovery had evolved into something larger, a mission. To transform how the healthcare system and families approached stroke survivors' autonomy and dignity. As the event wound down, Dr. Khan approached with an unexpected proposal. Evelyn, the feedback on your presentation and facilitation has been extraordinary. I'd like to discuss the possibility of creating a formal position for you in our patient advocacy program, paid, part-time, with flexibility around your ongoing recovery needs. The offer caught Evelyn by surprise. She had been volunteering her time and expertise, finding purpose in the work without expecting professional recognition. I'm honored, she replied. But I need to think about what that would mean for my other commitments. Of course, Dr. Khan agreed. It's just that your unique combination of clinical experience and personal insight is exactly what this program needs. Consider it an investment in systemic change. That evening, Evelyn hosted a small celebration at her home, a gathering of the people who had supported her throughout her recovery journey. Margaret brought her famous crab dip, Catherine had prepared a special dessert, and Michael grilled on the patio overlooking the bay. Even Diane, her physical therapist, had joined them, now as much a friend as a healthcare provider. As twilight settled over the water, casting long golden reflections across the waves, Evelyn found herself sitting beside Edward on the garden bench Thomas had built decades ago. You've come a long way since our conversation about protecting your assets, the attorney observed, sipping the wine Michael had selected. Evelyn smiled, remembering her initial concerns that had prompted her to review her estate plans. It's been quite a journey, not at all what I expected when I first called your office. Life rarely follows our careful plans, Edward agreed. Which is why I wanted to check if you're still comfortable with the arrangements we made regarding your estate, given how circumstances have changed. The question was pertinent. Evelyn had made significant changes to her will and trust arrangements during the height of her conflict with Melissa, creating structures that protected her assets from potential exploitation but also limited Michael's direct access to his inheritance. I've been thinking about that, she admitted. Michael has shown tremendous growth these past few months. The situation with Melissa revealed character strengths I always believed he possessed but hadn't yet needed to demonstrate. Edward nodded thoughtfully. Adversity has a way of bringing out those qualities, or their absence. In Michael's case, definitely their presence, Evelyn said firmly. He faced a painful truth about his marriage, made difficult decisions with integrity, and has been rebuilding his life with remarkable resilience. So you're considering revising the restrictions on his inheritance? Evelyn watched as Michael laughed at something Catherine had said, the golden light of sunset illuminating his profile that so resembled Thomas's. I'm considering a balanced approach. The trust structure itself is sound, it protects the legacy Thomas and I built together. But perhaps the conditions could be adjusted to reflect Michael's demonstrated maturity and judgment. A thoughtful middle path, Edward approved. Not returning to the original arrangement, but acknowledging positive changes. Exactly, Evelyn agreed. I've learned that protection and punishment are not the same thing. My goal was never to punish Michael for Melissa's actions or his initial failure to recognize them. It was to ensure my wishes would be respected and my legacy preserved. Later, as the gathering moved indoors to escape the evening chill, Evelyn found herself observing the easy interaction of her family and friends with a sense of profound gratitude. Catherine and Michael were sharing stories from their childhood, each perspective slightly different but weaving together into the rich tapestry of family memory. Margaret and Diane were deep in conversation about healthcare policy changes, their professional expertise evident in their animated discussion. This, she reflected, was the true measure of recovery, not just the improved strength in her left side or the restored fluidity of her movements, but the reclamation of her place within this circle of meaningful relationships. Not as someone to be managed or protected, but as the strong center around which these connections revolved. Michael approached, refilling her glass with sparkling water. "Penny for your thoughts, Mom. You've got that contemplative look." "I was just thinking about how recovery isn't a straight line," she replied. "It's more like a spiral. You revisit similar challenges but from a higher perspective each time." He settled beside her on the sofa. "That sounds applicable to more than stroke recovery." "Indeed," Evelyn agreed. "It applies to most of life's significant challenges. The key is to keep moving upward on that spiral, not getting stuck revisiting the same difficulties from the same perspective." Michael was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I've been meaning to ask you something, but I wasn't sure how to approach it. It's about the house." Evelyn tensed slightly, memories of Melissa's real estate inquiries still fresh. "What about the house?" "I want you to know that I hope you stay here as long as you want to," Michael said earnestly. "This is your home, and seeing you reclaim it after the stroke, adapt it to support your recovery, transform Dad's study into your advocacy workspace, it's been powerful. This house is part of your recovery story, and I respect that completely." The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to Evelyn's eyes. "Thank you for saying that, Michael. It means more than you know." "I just wanted to be clear," he continued, "especially after everything that happened with Melissa. Whatever you decide about this house, staying forever, downsizing someday, turning it into a stroke recovery retreat center," he smiled at this last suggestion, "I support you 100%. Evelyn reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Your father would be so proud of the man you've become, Michael. Not despite the challenges you've faced, but because of how you've faced them." The evening continued with comfortable conversation and shared memories, the kind of gathering that nourishes the spirit as much as the body. As her guests began to depart, Evelyn stood in the doorway of the home she had fought to protect, watching as headlights disappeared down the driveway one by one. Catherine was the last to leave, having arranged to stay at a nearby hotel before her flight back to Seattle the following day. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she said, embracing Evelyn tightly. "Not just for your recovery or your advocacy work, though those are incredible. I'm proud of how you refused to let anyone diminish you, even when you were at your most vulnerable." "I had good examples," Evelyn replied, thinking of her own mother's quiet strength and Thomas's unwavering respect for her capabilities throughout their marriage. "And excellent support." After Catherine left, Evelyn moved through her home with the comfortable familiarity of decades, turning off lights and checking locks, simple routines that had become victories of independence regained. In the study that had once been Thomas's sanctuary and was now her advocacy workspace, she paused to update her recovery journal, a practice that had become an important part of her healing process. "Today marked 6 months since the stroke," she wrote. "When I think back to those first days in the hospital, uncertain if I would walk unassisted again or regain full use of my left hand, today's accomplishments seem almost miraculous." Speaking at the symposium, facilitating the family discussion group, hosting dinner for everyone, all would have seemed impossible goals back then. She continued, reflecting on the journey's unexpected dimensions. "The physical recovery has been challenging, but the emotional and relational aspects proved even more complex. Learning to advocate for my own autonomy while accepting necessary help. Confronting Melissa's attempts to control my life while preserving my relationship with Michael. Revising my expectations without diminishing my standards." As she wrote, Evelyn realized that her stroke recovery had become a metaphor for the larger challenges of aging and life transition, the balance between independence and interdependence, the courage to enforce boundaries while maintaining connections, the wisdom to adapt without surrendering essential dignity. "What began as a medical crisis became a crucible for growth," she concluded in her journal. "Not growth I would have chosen, certainly, but growth I have come to value. The stroke took things from me, temporarily or permanently, but it also revealed strengths I had forgotten I possessed and opened doors to new purpose I couldn't have imagined." The following morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect April day that beckoned Evelyn to her garden. The daffodils Thomas had planted years ago were in full bloom, their bright yellow faces turned toward the sun with what seemed like intentional optimism. In the vegetable beds she had prepared weeks earlier, tiny green shoots were emerging, evidence of life's persistent renewal. As she knelt carefully to thin the seedlings, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Khan's number. "Evelyn, I hope I'm not calling too early," the doctor began. "But I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday about the patient advocacy position." "Not at all," Evelyn assured her. "I've been thinking about it." "Wonderful, because there's a new development." The state health department was so impressed with yesterday's symposium that they've expressed interest in expanding our program to other hospitals throughout Delaware. They specifically mentioned your presentation as a model for the kind of patient-centered approach they want to promote. The news took Evelyn's breath away. What had begun as her personal journey of recovery and advocacy was being recognized as a valuable contribution to healthcare policy. "That's extraordinary," she managed finally. "It is," Dr. Khan agreed. "And it means the position I mentioned would involve not just working with patients and families at Beebe, but potentially helping to shape stroke recovery protocols throughout the state. Your nursing background combined with your personal experience and your gift for communication make you uniquely qualified." After ending the call with a promise to meet for lunch to discuss details, Evelyn sat on the garden bench, absorbing the magnitude of this unexpected opportunity. 6 months ago, she had been fighting for basic autonomy in her own home, confronting a daughter-in-law who saw her stroke as justification for taking control of her life and assets. Now she was being invited to help transform how the healthcare system approached stroke survivors' autonomy and dignity on a statewide level. The contrast was so profound it almost made her laugh out loud. Her phone chimed with a text from Catherine, "Flight delayed. Extra time for breakfast? I can pick you up in 30. Evelyn responded immediately, "Perfect. Have news to share." As she prepared to meet her daughter, Evelyn thought about the changes of the past 6 months, the physical recovery that continued day by day, the reclamation of her independence, the renewed relationship with Michael, the unexpected professional opportunity, and most significantly, the deepened understanding of her own resilience and worth. The stroke had been a dividing line in her life, separating before from after in ways both obvious and subtle. But she had refused to allow it to become a diminishment. Instead, with determination, support, and the wisdom gained through decades of life experience, she had transformed recovery into renewal, challenge into opportunity, and potential loss into profound gain. From the kitchen window, she could see Catherine's rental car approaching up the driveway. Evelyn gathered her things, including the folder containing her latest draft of estate plan revisions that acknowledged Michael's growth while still protecting her legacy. She had learned that true strength lay not in rigid positions but in thoughtful adaptation, recognizing change, responding to it with wisdom, and moving forward with both clear boundaries and open heart. As she stepped outside to greet her daughter, Evelyn Peterson walked with the quiet confidence of a woman who had faced one of life's most challenging tests and emerged not just intact, but transformed. Her left side still showed subtle signs of the stroke that had nearly taken her life, but her spirit revealed something far more significant: the undiminished power of a person who knows her own worth and refuses to let anyone convince her otherwise. The bay stretched beyond her garden, its waters reflecting the morning light in countless shifting patterns, much like recovery itself, constantly changing yet ultimately flowing in one direction, forward. And forward was exactly where Evelyn intended to go, carrying with her the lessons of the past 6 months, that age is not a surrender of authority, that health challenges are not a forfeiture of autonomy, and that knowing your true worth is the greatest protection against those who would diminish it. "Ready for breakfast?" Catherine called, stepping from the car. "More than ready," Evelyn replied with a smile that contained all the wisdom of her journey. "For breakfast and whatever comes next." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.